It's Mark Elliott inside Elliot's Loft. And I was just thinking to myself, this thing is really starting to move in different directions by now. I'm sure you're aware, you heard a couple of shows we've done with Common Ground, myself and Dr. Marcy. And a while ago, the idea was given to me. When I say given to me, let me just put out there clearly. God gave me the idea, do something in terms of up from the ashes. Now, when he first gave it to me, I didn't know exactly how I was going to handle it and what I was going to do with it. But I stood still. I do that a lot of times. I let him speak to me. And from there, it came from the idea have people basically speak and talk about where they've been, how they got to point A to point B, in reality, how God has carried them and carried all of us from point A to point B. And there goes giving God the glory. Well, this show is going to be based on Up from the Ashes. And when I really got it all together and moving in the right direction, I knew I wanted to get this gentleman on and have him be part of it. He was gracious enough to say yes. I'm speaking of the paternity coach, Carnell Smith. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Mark. Hey, thanks again for the invite to Elliot's Loft. Or in this
Man, you
case,
always
is Up from the Ashes, right?
absolutely, man. You're always welcome, man. You're always welcome. I want you have accomplished so much just in knowing you and learning more about you. Man, you've accomplished so much, and you've done so much for others. So I want to go back to the beginning because I'm thinking when you were little Cornell, very little Cornell, you weren't thinking about paternity or thinking about a lot of things. But let's see how all this kind of took place.
Okay. All right. Well, rolling the clock back. Um, Probably my earliest memories is playing on my grandparents' farm as a little lad, and we did something very creative that we couldn't do in the city, and that was ride the hogs.
Hmm.
I remember that because it was absolutely thrilling. The hogs didn't like it, and most of the time was spent trying to catch them so we could stay on, and them bucking and everything. I I bring this up just as you can't always tell when you see people today. You don't know where their journey started from, and people would look at me today and say, "Oh, you must be a city guy," and I'm like, "Nah, I was actually born in the country." um, but in those early years, my mother had been separated from my father, apparently through an attack by a jealous woman. And this woman apparently attempted to poison my mother while she was carrying me so she could get my father. And
Hmm.
I know that God has had his hand on my life and protected me because that attempt to kill me did not work. And I believe that God had a purpose for me, just like he does for everyone else. And that in the fullness of time, we come to find out what it was. So as moving on through that, after my birth there in McRae, Georgia, and that experience with my cousins riding the hogs, we eventually ended up moving back to Florida. And my early years in school was right before schools were integrated. You remember we used to be somewhat segregated. And during those years, um, my parents, both my mother and father, told me my job, well, their job is to provide for me and me, my job as a kid, one of 11 siblings. I have, let's see, 7 sisters, 4 brothers, and 2 stepmoms. And all of them collectively worked together to make sure that all of us kids knew each other, make sure I had a relationship with my paternal family. Um, and probably one of the main things out of that when you have a very large family is make sure your kids don't end up dating each other and that they don't end up in relationships with close family members. Who knew that I would eventually end up in the DNA business, helping people, identify family relationships.
Oh my.
That's interesting. But what I remember in the
Hmm.
early years, I remember being bullied extremely because my parents told me I had a duty to go to school and do my absolute best, and that they don't give rewards for C's, D's, and F's. Now, if you got C's, D's, and F's, that was an indication you needed help, and it was your job to request the help and then do everything possible to utilize that help so that you could do better. But you were never okay with bringing those grades home, sitting on those grades, and saying that, "Oh, I'm doing the best that I can, and you guys should just accept it." And why I point that out is my mother was the valedictorian for her class, and my father was somewhat of a jack of trades from his military days to two marriages and the relationship that resulted in me and my other siblings, that they believe that education is the great equalizer, and that when pursued with great diligence and pursuit of with a spirit of excellence, it could provide you with great doors of opportunity. And they push that. I mean, to the extent that while in the social life, I got bullied because my pursuing education to a standard eventually caused me to get tested for the gifted program. Apparently, I did well as some of my other siblings, and that ended up putting me in a whole different experience at school uh, to get into STEM programs, get experience with electronics, engineering, accounting, uh, those kind of things that open up a lot of doors for me, right? And I had this wild and crazy idea that, well, hey, I'm going to go to college based on that. But during the social life, I literally got bullied by my own people in the black neighborhood because, well, you talk too good, you talk proper, you're trying to sound white. I was like, no, I'm not. I was like, when you have a grandmother that's an English teacher, you can't bring ebonics to the house and think that's okay. It would absolutely not be tolerated. If that makes any sense to you, Mark.
No, it does. It's amazing where, listening to you, because that still goes on, probably bigger now than it was back then, where I'm sure, I think the difference now where a lot of our kids sense that they're going to be teased and bullied, and they dummy themselves down, don't even try as hard anymore. And that's
Yeah,
sad. They
it
don't even
is.
really try to push themselves forward. So it's crazy to think that for our people, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm basically speaking about our people, when we
Mm-hmm.
see one that is really trying to excel, instead of supporting and getting behind, we really take the steps to tear down and basically try to put stumbling blocks in your way. So
Yeah,
that's amazing, man. Utterly
yeah.
amazing.
And it totally shocks me because I saw much love and support poured out for student athletes who didn't go any further than the high school. I saw much love and support for students who had an affinity toward the performing arts, whether it be music, uh, ballet, performing on stage, etc. Um, great community support for those, right? And some of them would make it, but to me, you have higher odds on making it as a student athlete or musician and artist than you do pursuing excellent in trades or in college by pursuing something like engineering and science, technology, engineering, math, right? Um, I'm just left me dumbfounded. But I was more concerned about what my parents had to say than what my bullies had to say. And that continued even up until the schools got integrated. And what amazed me, Mark, is that I was shown more love by the white kids than I was by the black kids that I grew up with.
Mm, wow. Wow.
And to them, the fact that I was in the gifted classes, which would be the equivalent to your accelerated honors and AP classes today, um, in many of those classes, Mark, I was the only black in there. Um, Maybe sometimes I would have one black girl in the class with me, right? Or sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
might be two of us black guys, but it wasn't that we were clearly not the majority. But I never caught any grief from the entire time that the schools integrated and I was in mixed schools, all the way up to college and predominantly white engineering school. That Yeah,
Hmm.
go ahead.
Now, I was going to ask, why do you think that? So, if you can go back and kind of zero in on that when that happening, why do you think they were more receptive of you as opposed to your own people being receptive of your smarts?
I think there was mutual respect on my abilities than the color of my skin by the white kids and the white teachers and the black teachers. Um, I got great support from black teachers, mind you, but in the neighborhood and the other kids, they're like, man, think one of the names they used to call me, there's like, oh, there goes Dr. Spock. Uh, there's the professor. I'm like, what kind of grades you got this time? And they're like, oh man, he probably got all A's. And then it would ridicule me over excellence. I was like, oh wow, this makes no sense. And my father says, listen, you could either follow the crowd or you could follow what we say do. And then he reminded me that in his house, it was a benevolent dictatorship. In case I was confused about which way to go.
Okay, all right.
Um, Ultimately, I made the decision that, well, forget the neighborhood folks. They could harass me all they wanted to. That continued until I hit a growth spurt. Um, Man, I was short up until probably like the ninth grade and probably around 4'11". Hit a growth spurt, shot up to 5'10", and started playing basketball and dared to try to go out for football. And then they started to like me because I started to do some sports.
Look out.
But I was no LeBron James. um, I got injured and ultimately broken wrist and a knee injury made it such that I couldn't run as fast. And as a result, I had to give up the sports. And my father said, and this is why education is plan A.
Yeah.
Sports, uh, the arts, and all those other things. I says they are plan B. But the main thing is you always got to have a main plan and you got to have a backup plan. That was his train of thought, right?
Hmm. It's interesting because I know a lot of folks that come from the South, and I'm assuming I think you spoke of Georgia, your father's from the South. A lot of
Actually,
times,
father's from Florida.
Florida. Okay.
Mom was from Georgia, and I spent a couple of years there. And ultimately
Okay.
ended up back in Florida.
Okay. I'm curious to understand a little bit about your father because a lot of times back then, our people didn't put an onus on education, but your parents did. I love how your
Mm-hmm.
father handled you, in that
Mm-hmm.
scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Was so I'm if you don't mind, let's take a second and
Okay.
where do you think that came from for him?
I'm confident that where that came for him was because his mom was an English teacher who graduated from Bethune-Cookman College, and his aunt also, I think, graduated, I think, from Florida A&M, and my great grandmother at that time was a business owner, entrepreneur, and education as the great equalizer was heavily pushed. So I heard that all my life as a kid, that it's not, are you going to go to college? It is whether or not you're going to do it by going through the community college route, or you're going to go directly there, or if you're good enough for sports, can you avail yourself of some sort of a scholarship? Um, in my case, we were poor enough to where I was able to qualify for grants uh, for at least my first couple of years in college.
Hmm.
So when you have family that says that it's not about trying to impress other people, it is not about trying to put on any particular airs, it is to give yourself the maximum number of doors that you can walk through, and choosing what you would like to do from a future perspective.
Wow. Awesome family. Awesome
Yeah.
family.
And trust me, they check progress reports, and they check grades.
Okay. Wow.
And
Okay.
like I said, C's, D's, and F's were not rewarded. In fact, that led to some corrective behavior. What do you call it? Behavior modification training.
Okay. That's a nice way to put it.
That's a nice way to put it. Because you couldn't convince my parents that you were struggling in class, but you could spend 4 hours down at the basketball court hanging out with your friends, and you couldn't do your homework.
Wow.
Listen, with my folks, if the teacher assigned you the even problems, my folks required that you do the odd problems too,
Okay.
because the nature of problem solving wasn't that they didn't believe in you learning how to be just taught how to pass the test. You had to learn the material. You learn how to problem solve. You had to learn how to do research. So in a lot of ways, I feel that that push from both mom and dad, that prepared me in a great way to eventually becoming an engineer.
Nice. You had a great foundation, a great platform that sprung you. That's awesome, man.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. It's interesting because sometimes we forget how necessary that foundation is. We really forget how valuable the foundation that starts, mom, dad, the surrounding family, what
Mm-hmm.
they do and what they contribute to basically spring us forward.
Yes. And one other thing that I didn't know how important it was back then. Um, there was a requirement to go to church, but not just go for the sake of appearances. We were required to go to Sunday school, to go to Bible study, and go to the kids' church. And you got quizzed on what took place there. To It was not enough that you were just there. You had to demonstrate that you got something from it, and had no idea then that that was kind of a foundational thing for me. And I remember as a kid hearing this message where the preacher preached that no man could serve two masters. And that message like puzzled me. And then once I got the understanding, how you had to commit, you had to fully commit to God. And it wasn't just enough to say, well, my grandparents go to church, or they gave money to the church and they were founding members, and or I'm part of this family. Some people have this belief that because their family is close friends with the senior pastor or something. My folks didn't let me walk in that land of Delulu.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, they sternly support. I mean, so, prepared you to be who you are, man. Now that I of course have had you on before and understand some things about you. I see why. I clearly see why. Now, when you went on to become an engineer, what are
Mm-hmm.
some things you may have faced at the time in college? Because I understand you're in high
Oh,
school.
yeah.
What were some things that might have been present then?
Well, I was determined that I was going to go to college, right? I ended up graduating from the college track, and my high school is actually an engineering school. So they were determined that you would either learn trades or you would be prepared, fully able to do college level work before you graduated high school. Um, that after getting out of there, I had a choice. I had a lot of opportunities to join several branches of the military, Air Force, Navy, Army, and they had great programs. But what stood out to me, this particular engineering school says, well, you could get your degree in 3 years here. And I said, say that again.
Hmm.
I said, well, and my dad said, well, hey, seemed like this could be the better deal. I had done enough explorations with the guidance counselor, and it really appealed to my interest. And I was like, well, oh, so you can really do something with all this math, calculus, uh, you know, advanced problem solving. So there's some real world application to this stuff. I was like, well, shoot, this is intriguing. And
Hmm.
I looked at the opportunities to find a career and not just like get a job, that this was something that could be lifetime. So I did pretty well, and I actually had similar grades in the physics, the math, and all that stuff, and the sciences while in high school as I did in accounting. But I loved the engineering path more. So opting there, came to Atlanta to go to school, and I managed to pretty much go trouble free until about the first year. Got a job working at UPS while I was in university, and I almost got kicked out of school when they put all of the guys for my school in the apartment complex with all of the girls from a fashion college. And those girls would throw parties in the middle of the week, and trying to go to class after you've been to an all night party. I went to class and the professor marked me absent. He said, Mr. Smith, if you're not willing and able to engage to learn anything in my class, as far as I'm concerned, you're absent. And you keep this up, we'll kick you out and we'll get somebody to take your seat. He says, you don't understand. I got mine. It's up to you to get yours. Man, that was a wake up call, Mark. And
Ooh.
then it was something my grandfather said to me when he and my dad put me on the plane to come to Atlanta. He said, don't forget what you came for and don't leave without it. So I had to make a quality decision, partying with these fashion models or pursuing and getting my degree.
Hmm.
Man, I dropped those girls in like a hot rock, dropped out of those parties and made sure that I could get to my classes and be fully capable, wide awake, able to learn.
Yeah. Now, the instructor that said that to you, was he black or white?
Both, both. There was
Okay.
there was one professor who was black, and there was one that was white. And what was interesting, this was a private university, and this school actually hired people who were like top shelf in their industry. For my remember when I was learning how to program microprocessors, the professor for the class actually worked for Apple, and I'm talking about back in the day when we were doing basic programming on cassette tape.
Hmm.
We're talking way back, right? And those professors, if you were willing to learn and you were willing to make, they also imparted life lessons and things like that, right? And then ultimately, I would work. I mean, I'd be in school most of the morning, and then in the afternoons, I would be working at UPS. so that I could earn money to pay for my books and books, rent, eat. And then right after that, my first major challenge happened. My roommate, who I rode to UPS with, decided to quit college. And this became a major problem for me because he was my ride to work. And without a ride to work, that was going to mean extreme difficulty in being able to pay for books, groceries, rent, and all of
Hmm.
those things. And man, I came to my grandfather, my father, and my grandparents, and I was saying, "Hey, I'm in a bad spot where I would have to drop out of school and come back home." And they said, "No, you don't. No, you don't." They said, "Listen, we're going to get you a car." And they got me a 1972 Buick Skylark with a 2-barrel carburetor, 4-door, gold, with I think it had a brass roof on it, and it was a V8. However, they bought it, paid in full, hand me the title, gave me a year's worth of car insurance to get me started so I could keep my job and stay in school. And they told me, they says, the reason we would do this for you is all of those years when you were helping out with the family business and stuff, you didn't ask for anything. You did, you would, even coming out on school breaks and stuff, that I would come and I would help uh, them with the family business. Um, and they're like, we see you trying. So since you're willing to help yourself, we're willing to help you help yourself. And that kind of affected my call and mission even today about helping other people, because of that kind of love and support that I got from my family. And this is predominantly on my paternal family. Nothing against my maternal family. I just got to, after I graduated high school, I just spent probably good 95% of my time with my paternal family.
Hmm.
Um, I stayed in school, and then I hit my very next challenge that forced me to drop out of the university for a whole I think a trimester. I got called to the office at the university, and they said, um, "You're going to need to come up with all of the money for your tuition." I was like, "But I got grants." They were like, "Well, let me tell you about this problem you have. You have lost all of your grants." I was like, "Well, how did that happen?" Well, the money that you make at UPS that you use to pay for your books, your incidentals, your rent and everything, and your car maintenance and stuff. So you make too much money to qualify for your grants. So I lost 100% of my tuition coverage and got pulled out of school with a 3.81 GPA based
Whoa.
on unable to meet the financial obligations. Now, to a lot of people, quitting might look like a viable option and going back home might seem to be an option. That didn't even cross my mind. Something about tenacity, something about, when you have a dad speak life into you, and your dad tells you you can do it. Look, you might have to seek help. You may have to ask some other people for options, some ideas, and you may have to work hard at it. Okay. So I got me 2 additional jobs while I was out of school. And then I started exploring what are the available options so that I could pay for my remaining. I think I had like two terms left that I needed to complete and to be able to graduate. And that's when I heard about educational loans. And at this point, I'm 100% taking care of myself. And they looked at, I had perfect credit. Um, I was working 3 jobs, and They looked at my GPA and that's like, you absolutely qualify. I was stunned. So I borrowed the money. I worked those couple of jobs, and then I got back into school, dropped those two jobs, kept my UPS job, and I eventually graduated number three in my class with a 3.93 GPA. And I
Nice.
already had a job working for a company that got bought by Cisco before I graduated.
Wow. It's I'm love hearing this. This is when Black Men Talk with the fraternity coach Carnell Smith. And it's our version of Up from the Ashes. And realistically, what we do, we go back to the beginning of someone's life and allow them to tell their story, their journey. And through it, we notice at times where God steps in and carrying. And to hear at a point where you lost your funding based on working at UPS, and like you said, that would have shocked a lot of people. And I'm listening to you. When you said 3.8, you bet not. I'm thinking in my mind, you bet not go home and leave school.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that right there, all your faith, all your work said, no, I got to go do what I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And for a young man to know to add two more jobs,
Mm-hmm.
two more, not one, but two more, and basically, as time goes on, he brings a way for you to go back to school. I love
Yes.
it. I love it.
Yes. Yes. Well, my dad said quitting is not an option when you don't put it on the table.
I like that. I like that. I like that. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. You know, you can't control what happens to you. You can control how you respond. And that's a philosophy I picked up from my dad. My father was like a jack of trades to me, uh, kind of an avid reader, uh, dabbled in a lot of things after he got out of the army. Um, he was look, he was good in more than just having kids.
He did an awesome job based on you, man. He did an awesome job raising his kids. So you're working at a place that right out of college, after, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly, I think it was a 3 years, let's say 3.5 years from college. You're
Yes.
working. Yeah. How is your life different now?
Well, my life is radically different now in that eventually I made I'm going to say a side journey, and I made this crazy mistake that I was going to marry a girlfriend who I knew from my younger days back in Florida, and I moved her up to Atlanta, and I called myself going to marry her, and I completely did it in the wrong order. Uh, Lived with her, moved in, had a baby, and this woman literally turned my world upside down to where she caused me such lack of peace and caused chaos in my house that I would literally not want to come home after work to just avoid her. And
Hmm.
eventually we ended up breaking up, and I I ended up battling her for years in court, fighting just to see my son, even though I had joint custody, joint legal, joint physical custody. But then she moved out of state. And as difficult as it is for a, a guy, especially a black man who wants to be an involved dad, who has learned from his own dad and his own granddad how to be an involved dad, and you want to be that for your son, that it just made no sense to me. Well, like, listen, just because you and I are not in a relationship, that shouldn't have anything to do with me and my son having to have a relationship. And what I found out a little later is that if I wouldn't take her back, far as she was concerned, I served no purpose than to finance her life with no contact with my son. And that nearly bankrupted me. I become actually that fueled my early path toward becoming a men and fathers' rights advocate based out of my own experience and years of going to court and going across state lines. As difficult as it can be to to fight to be involved in your kid's life with an unwilling parent when you're not a danger to your kid, you're not a threat to your kid. You just do not want to be in a relationship with the kid's mother. And as long as she didn't do anything that endangered your kid, I didn't care what she did. And told that to her face. Well, she did not like that, Mark.
I can imagine. I can imagine. It
So,
almost sounds like when I'm listening to that, you know, it sounds like blackmail. And we may not call it that, but think
mm-hmm,
about it from this perspective in a sense. She takes a child that you and her have
mm-hmm,
and she moves away.
mm-hmm.
And the only way you can see your child is if you're basically going to be with her. Now,
Yeah,
yeah, that
yeah.
that has some blackmailish characteristics to it if you think about it
I
realistically.
I agree.
And I'm always amazed in situations like that. It's interesting you speak of that because I my first child, my first daughter, the mother and I, time the child was born, you know, we weren't together when my
Mm-hmm,
daughter was born.
mm-hmm,
And I'm thankful to God that I didn't experience that. And I remember saying to her when my daughter was born, she said to me, I asked her, what does she want? And she said, all she wanted was her daughter being raised knowing her father. And, you know, to me, that was easy. Now,
yeah.
I'm not saying sometimes we didn't butt heads or things didn't
Mm-hmm,
go the way they should,
mm-hmm.
but she never took the role to where she's going to use the child to
Yeah,
basically garner a relationship. She didn't like the fact that we weren't in one,
right.
but the child never got used as a pawn to garner a relationship, garner money. Because to me, again, that's blackmailish, man. And I don't
It is.
understand. To what's really well, you know, I'm sure she was chasing financial. You know, she saw who you were. She knew what you'd been through, what you
Mm-hmm,
accomplished.
mm-hmm.
And what's amazing is when a situation like that happens, the kid is not even thought of on their side.
Oh no, no. She
Yeah, they're
gave
not
no
even.
thought. Gave no
Yeah,
thought to that.
they give kid no thought, and they're so selfish at
Mm-hmm.
that time. To whatever happened, the damage that's being done to the child, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
You're right. You're right. Ultimately, she ended up feeling guilty after her own sisters called her to the carpet on that, and they read her the riot act over like, wait a minute, your son has a father who wants to see him, and then the man travels nearly 8 hours to come to pick up his kid, and she would make sure, listen, on my court ordered days to pick him up and keep him, she would make sure she was not home during the entire time I was in town. And then when I get back to Atlanta, she would call and say, well, now you can pick him up.
She's classic. She's classic.
Yes.
She's
Yes.
classic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
And part of why she was angry is I kicked her out after she started dating other people while she lived in my house. And I told her that I'm a one woman man and I don't share. And since you want to be with other people, I packed up everything that I gave her and drove her to the other guy's house and told him he could have her. She did not like that, man. She says, you're not going to fight for me? I was like,
Whoa.
fight for you? You don't even know what loyalty means. No, I wouldn't fight for you. It's like, hey, that your actions say you want to be in the streets. As far as I'm concerned, the streets can have you.
Oh wow. Yeah. Sometimes we don't understand what we have good, Carnell. We just don't
Yeah,
understand it. Yeah.
yeah. Well, ultimately, that helped me later, a bit later in life, in becoming much better in being selective. I knew I wanted to be a family guy. I loved how my father was passionate about family, and he was passionate about having interaction with us kids and being involved in our lives. And remember, there's a bunch of us,
Mm-hmm.
just on my father's side alone, there's 5 girls and 4 boys. I'm in kind of like near the middle. I'm not even the oldest. My sisters were older, and I've already lost one sister and one brother. They've passed on before, even before my dad passed. But ultimately, that experience, nearly getting bankrupted in court, till eventually, um, I can tell you one of the main reasons that dads, especially in the black community, who lose contact with their kids, is predicated upon not wanting to have anything to do with the child's mother. Gets to a point of where, and in this day and age, of where you could be, your career and your freedom can be at risk based on a false allegation, and you have a person getting up in your face, talking stuff and physically attacking you, and eventually you just like, I don't need this. I'm gonna exercise the option and save myself. And then she moved around a lot. It wasn't until many years later, um, I lost contact with my son for probably a good 6 years. Um, and I had created this web page talking about how much I miss my son, and how one day I was hoping I could meet him again. Would you believe my son found that website and then contacted me while he was in a website boot camp through Walt Disney? He was learning how to do web pages. He found me, searched for me. So in his latter years through middle school and high school, while his mother thought she was keeping us apart, he had found me and we were meeting in secret.
Look
I'd
at
travel
God.
there and have lunch with him.
Look at God. Yeah.
But he,
Look.
well, he told me this. He said, Dad, based on my mother's character, I knew there had to be more to the story than she was telling me. And he
Wow.
got quite angry with her when he found out not just my side of it, because I had court documents. You hear me? And she wouldn't let him receive birthday gifts, Christmas gifts. She would, anything that I bought him, she wouldn't let him have. She would let him see it. She'd let him ride the bicycle and then leave, and he couldn't have it.
Hmm.
And he got a chance to see all that stuff because my family pretty diligent on taking photos, and we kept the Christmas cards, the birthday cards, and all that stuff. And he got a chance to see the court documents and all that stuff. And he went some years separated from his mom. I think eventually she had to give him a huge apology.
Wow.
But that affected me becoming a legislative advocate in seeking reform, both on the child support level and against parental alienation, where you got dads who are actively trying to be active fathers, but they have a huge hill to climb when you have an unsympathetic, gynocentric focused court that is where mom even can get literally almost free representation, get all kind of assistance and support. And as a dad, you're like, well, Your Honor, what is it? What is the cost for me to be able to see my kid? I mean, there was no problem when he lived under the same roof with me. And if it costs that much for him, I spent less than that. You know what you're asking me to pay her, I spent less than that when all three of us lived together.
Hmm. It's amazing when you think about this. As men, we're put here for that reason, to be fathers,
Mm-hmm.
to produce, to populate the earth. And it's amazing that we have to fight. Some of us
Mm-hmm.
have to literally fight just to be what God meant for us to be. Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
We have to fight just to be that. And that's utterly amazing. And like you said, they receive a lot of different things and things are offered to them. But it's like the society really, and you could say to an extent, maybe because there's a lot of fathers didn't own up to what they're supposed to do, but I would say so what, but society really at times just take fatherhood for granted that really doesn't
Mhm.
mean anything for the most part and don't really try to help or support fathers. They really
No,
don't.
no. In fact, they become sort of one dimensional in focus. And what I mean by that is, fathers have a God ordained role to be provider, protector, teacher, coach, mentor, uh, guiding, look, active guiding hand in the lives of their kids, help them with developing and exercising critical thinking skills, problem solving, how to do judgment evaluation and risk assessments, develop logic, even though men and women are emotional and more heavily weighted on emotion on women by and large as a group, but how to not let your emotional decision guide you into a path that is going to be detrimental to your current and future plans, right? You know, I mean, with between my dad and granddad, shows how to even sit there, write the stuff out on paper, use the Ben Franklin truth table. All right, write out the benefits, write out the risk. Now, if the benefits outweigh the risk and it makes sense to pursue this path, then this is the better path, no matter what your feelings are. I mean, ultimately, that kind of approach helped me see that not taking my former fiance back was the absolute best decision in my life, because
Yeah,
she had this weird idea that you were supposed to fight and then make up, and she would provoke, and she was jealous and she was insecure. So combine all of that with a person who saw nothing wrong with when extra attention by other men was offered in her direction, she felt it was okay to pursue it, and not, she didn't have a lot of boundaries. I'm like, hey, it's not my job to teach you what loyalty means when you and I are already in an engaged relationship. You accepted my ring toward to get married, but your conduct and your actions say she's for the streets. My attitude is when somebody shows you that's who they are, believe them. Don't try to change their mind, and take active steps to distance yourself from them, even if it hurts. And
absolutely.
that,
That's a strong. She was. I'm sorry. She's a
go
strong
ahead.
cocktail. That's a strong
Yeah.
drink right there, brother. She's a cocktail. I, I'm listening to you, and I'm constantly, seeing again up from the ashes. And I'm wondering because as tumultuous as that was, and as how much the tribulations and the trials were there with her,
Hmm.
I'm going to wipe that away for a minute.
Go ahead.
And if you wipe that away, do you think you would have become the advocate that you became?
I would say most likely not, because I was totally oblivious to the world of the dads who struggled. Because, thinking back to my classes on American law and government, the honors program that I took back in high school, I had this naive belief that it was the court's duty to mete out justice equally and fairly, and help come up with compromises when the parties could not approach and work out a compromise themselves. That there didn't have to be a winner and a loser. Until I learned how family court works across the nation, and I've been in multiple courtrooms across the nation. I've had clients across uh, all over the United States, and also military people who are deployed out of country. And I can tell you, after 30 years of talking to dads across multiple races, the things that I experienced was not unique to me. And it didn't matter whether you were Black dad, Latino dad, Hispanic dad, Caucasian dad. One of the things we noticed, well, it might be different based on what our income level was. And that just meant some guys paid more. But if all of us as a collective group were trying to be active dads, but we had reached a point in the relationship where we were under no circumstances going to support the mother anymore, there's just for peace of mind, it made no sense to have any further relationship or dealings with her. But not having a relationship with her did not mean I abandoned a relationship with my kid, until it got to a point to where I would nearly bankrupted. In my case, she thinks she moved like 13 times. And when my son reconnected with me, he told me what happened and why I couldn't find him for all those years. He said, Dad, during those times when you couldn't find me and you thought we were just moving around, he said, Dad, we got evicted because she would take the money for paying bills and go party or go do something else like that instead of paying her rent. And that called me to remember the experience of what happened the one time I gave her money to pay the electric bill for us. And all of a sudden I'm sitting in the dark at our house that I'm paying for. And Mark, she took the money and went shopping with it and gave the electric company something like $5 or $10 and put some on it instead of paying the entire bill. And that kind of like financial irresponsible behavior is something she continued to do after we parted ways. And my son explained to me, he says, Dad, I know what eviction papers look like before you open them up. I think she's now on her 7th or 8th husband, and all of the guys got rid of her.
Wow.
I am thoroughly convinced there's one common denominator in that path of relationships with her. Is her.
Wow. Yeah, that's clear. Yeah, no, it could be a mixed fraction or whatever. The common denominator is going to stay the same.
Yeah.
I do believe, as strange and tough as that was, it could have been a purpose for you in your life. And I know, who am I to say or think that, but I look at the work you have done for others and how you basically took them on. And as you say, you spoke with many different fathers. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times when we experience things in life, we think it's isolated on us, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And you was able to basically take what kind of burned you and help
Mm-hmm.
others.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get much better than that, because as I spoke earlier, in reality, what we're here for as men, to basically procreate, be fathers. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, the protection, the security, all that is cool too. But at the same time, we're here to help others.
Yeah, yeah. But
We don't.
my fault though. My fault, Mark, is that I did it in the wrong order. I didn't do it in God's order. In God's order, you get married first. You spend time with your wife, and you are a household that is united under God, and the two of you in that house serves God. Now that's God's order. Okay.
Absolutely.
I did not do that the first time around. So it wasn't enough to learn things about God's way. It was also important that I applied it, right? And I suffered as a result of my own actions, because I'm the person allowed her into my life. I'm the person that got engaged to her. And I didn't seek wise counsel about her on the front end. That was a costly decision. But I believe on accountability. I'll take my lumps on that one. And I became much more discerning. I learned from that and what I didn't want. And after all of that experience, I know there's a scripture that I think is Romans 8:28. And I believe it talks about how we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. That means sometimes in those difficult times and those sometimes seem like hopeless times, what we go through and what we learn about can actually yield some good later down the road.
Absolutely.
And it helped me gain a perspective. And as a result of that, that led me to influencing my senior pastors and multiple men's ministries and got them to do this thing, what I call court watch, because many of them have only heard women's perspective on relationship breakdowns and only the woman's perspective on the child's father. And I pointed something out to a lot of the ministry leadership. I says, you guys look at how you treat fathers on Father's Day versus how you treat mothers on Mother's Day. I says, you to the way you guys roll out the red carpet, you would think mothers are holy angels, never commit any wrong, never do anything, and that fathers are just slightly above pond scum, and that you deal with them in controlled doses.
Oh my.
And I said that to my pastor's face, and I pointed out to him, I says, you don't have the perspective of why a lot of these men are angry and hurt. So I invited him and some other pastors to go with me to family court. And I said, I want you to just observe and take notes on what you see happen. And they, again and again, they saw what happened to dads who had attorneys. They saw dads who came in there who couldn't afford attorneys, and they thought that they could plead for judicial help in being able to see their kids. And these guys are like, well, I pay the money. Well, gee, tell me, what is the going rate? How much do I have to pay to rent my kid for? You know, and because of not knowing how to prepare oneself and conduct oneself properly, and that, you know, knowing the rules of the court, rules of civil procedure, there's a whole lot that I know now, and from my own experience, that eventually, not just in advocacy, led to coaching and helping dads who attended my workshops, and many of those dads actually pursued and got custody of their kids as the best interest for the kid because they were the better parent, most emotionally stable, most emotionally mature, mental, financial, the person who was most willing and able to ensure that the child would have frequent quality contact with both sides of their family and not be used as a pawn or a weapon against the other parent.
Yeah.
I considered that out of my miserable experience that helped and shaped me to be extremely compassionate for the father who wants to be an active dad, but didn't know how.
I want to give you one more question, and
Okay.
I want to go back to excuse me, when you said you went back after you got the job, you went back
Mm-hmm.
and brought her to where you were.
Mm-hmm.
And with all you knew that you were given from your family, and we all, we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious if you can go back and reevaluate that. What made you go back to her with everything that's instilled inside knew at that time?
Mm-hmm.
What brought you to her to bring her to you?
Mm. I thought I wanted to have that family relationship, but had no training in relationship, not had no training in the marriage relationship. I am a big and avid supporter of premarital counseling so that people can be prepared for not just the wedding, but the marriage. So choosing a mate has to involve more than just their outward appearance. If she just because she's a brick house or she's stacked and built with all the physical attributes, that is not enough. And in fact, that is such a low standard that looks alone should disqualify a woman for a guy choosing her because it's more discerning for him to learn out what is the difference between the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31 and the strange woman who is in Proverbs chapter 2, 5, 6, and 7. They are not the same woman. And choosing wrong can cause a man to suffer for decades if it doesn't cost him his life.
Wow. Yeah, it doesn't get any more stronger than that. It's
No.
Mark Elliott. Mark Elliott, the paternity coach, Carnell Smith. You've been experiencing Up from the Ashes. He was gracious enough to stop by and share his story. And I love that because a lot of times when folks hear certain things about other people's lives, they learn something. Or at the same time as you spoke earlier, you realize you weren't the only one. And someone can listen to you, maybe going through, or maybe going through some of the same things that you're going through and realize, no, it's just not me.
Mm-hmm.
And hear how you basically came through, it could be instrumental and inspiring to them. And that's, if anything about doing a podcast or whatever, I think that's the beauty of it. That is
I
the
do.
ultimate beauty. Yeah, when we get into conversation and start speaking, because who knows how somebody may stumble onto this podcast, this episode, and needs to hear exactly some things you said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm
Inspire hope.
gracious. Absolutely, man. I want you to because here again you do some awesome work, man, for people, for brothers around this country, and I want you to let folks know, how they can get in contact with you, and
Okay.
yeah, if
All
they're
right.
seeking after this, hearing this, and they want to reach
Okay.
out to you, how can they do so?
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Carnell Smith. I am the paternity coach. The best way to reach me on the web is thepaternitycoach.com. That's THE paternitycoach.com. From there, you can access a lot of my social media. I'm on YouTube, Facebook, X, and several other platforms. But that's based out of about 30 years of experience becoming a men's rights, father's rights advocate, become somewhat of an expert at legislative consultant. I've operated, been an owner operator of legal DNA services worldwide, did that for 10 years. And I am happy to celebrate my 34th wedding anniversary a week ago. I eventually did get married to a woman who God used to heavily influence me to dedicate my life and really take the walk becoming a godly Christian man. And that her help over the years of learning what it was like to become a paternity fraud victim from another girlfriend before I met my wife, that ultimately I found out men, we benefit greatly. We either make a decision that we are a relationship guy and spend the time to learn how to navigate the relationship minefield by knowing upfront the difference between the virtuous woman in Proverbs 31 versus the strange woman who is spelled out in the Bible in Proverbs chapters 2, 5, 6, and 7. You can literally use strange woman as your search criteria. You'll see if she has strange woman attributes and you want to be a relationship guy, she is not your girl. So reaching me through thepaternitycoach.com is the best avenue. And if I could be of help or maybe provide guidance, instructions, a lot of times, um, those guys who face struggles in the relationship or more appropriately trying to be a dad or has to navigate family court for experience as paternity fraud victims, it is knowing what your options are and how to utilize those options to your best advantage. That to be can be helped by a coach. Um, and also, how do you get legal help? And your avenues, there are more than one ways for you to become your own advocate. You can learn how to represent yourself if you have the time, if you have the discipline. You're coachable and teachable. You can learn. For others, don't have the time, don't have the discipline to be able to be taught. There, you better have the money, and there are ways to control your costs. in terms of legal fees and stuff like that, to where you can get the benefit of having a legal counsel, legal advice from attorneys in your jurisdiction, and even be able to have access to an attorney in a 24 by 7 mode. Because if you ever get arrested for something or about to be arrested, you can't call your mama unless your mama's an attorney. Can't call your wife unless she's an attorney. You better have somebody that can help you get to legal help to help you with what you need to have handled. I'm Carnell Smith, the paternity coach.
I appreciate it, Cornell. I want to speak to you afterwards, man, because you gave me a great idea for the next show if you're willing to do it. We're talking a little bit. Folks, want to thank you for giving us an ear. Now, I can't say thank you enough. We really appreciate it. You know, God loves you, and we love you too. Take care of yourself. We'll talk again real soon.